Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Truth That Heals podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anthony Hernandez, and today's episode is an interview with Karinne, a former Jehovah Witness who will be sharing with us what life was like growing up as a Jehovah Witness and how things were like after she left. There will be moments in this interview that are dark, that are sad, that are traumatic, even talking about things like abuse and depression. But it's very raw and it's very honest and it's very real. And at the very end, you'll be finding out what is Karinne's truth that heals. So stay tuned for that. And before we begin this interview, if you have not yet subscribed, go ahead and subscribe or follow the Truth That Heals podcast and check out the show notes where you find more information where you can support this channel. Thank you. Karinne, thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. And before we get really started into this conversation, can you share with the audience what it is that you do?
Well, I'm an ex-Jehovah Witness. I'm currently studying my bachelor's in counseling. It's the first time that I'm getting an education, actually. And I work part-time with the elderly people in our community. And I'm a single mom of 2 teenagers.
Okay, so you mentioned that you are formerly a Jehovah Witness member, churchgoer. Can you talk a bit about that experience and how did it start?
Well, I was actually born in, so I had no choice whatsoever. My parents converted before I was born. So yeah, I was born into a very devoted household. My father was an elder, which is the equivalent basically of a priest, if I can compare. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and she was a narcissist who really had a heavy hand for discipline, basically. It was highly encouraged by the Jehovah Witnesses to discipline children by any means necessary. So she had her arsenal of, I'm trying to make light of it a little bit. She had her arsenal of weapons, which, the wooden spoon being her favorite. There was the occasional whipping with a leather belt. The broomstick, kneeling on a broomstick in the corner, was another favorite of hers. And washing my tongue with soap was another. Took me years to realize that she was a narcissist. I honestly thought that growing up in that kind of a household was normal. There was a lot of denigrating and belittling, a lot of gaslighting as well, which was difficult to wrap my head around it when I was a kid. I didn't understand why I wasn't getting hugs and kisses and affection. And my father was very, I'd have to say, emotionally unavailable. So if we wanted to talk about Jehovah and get into God discussions, he was all in. But when it came to other things, there really wasn't a connection. There was a huge disconnect. It really messed with my head as a kid. We were told at a young age that you don't associate with people that are not Jehovah Witnesses. So going to school was really messed up for me. I didn't understand why I had to go in the first place. And it was just a really weird experience because I was an awkward kid, first of all, when you're being raised in such a sheltered type environment and you're only supposed to associate with other Jehovah Witnesses. You don't really know what the outside world has to offer or what it's all about. So obviously I was really curious and I wanted to experience a lot. I was always fascinated with holidays as a kid. Like I absolutely loved holidays. But as a Jehovah Witness, you're not entitled to celebrate anything. It's against God. And I would remember on Halloween, my mom would close all the lights and make sure that nobody would come trick-or-treating at our house. And she'd have a couple of candles lit. but she would let us, or give us the privilege rather, of looking outside at all the kids in the neighborhood dressed up in costumes, going trick-or-treating. And I felt that huge disconnect inside me of, I wanted to be outside with those people. I didn't want to be inside with my family, which was kind of a weird process to go through as a kid. And on that note of not interacting with worldly people, when I started school, that was kind of a nightmare. The Jehovah Witness culture is very tattletale. So when I showed up in school, I was the tattletale of the class, and people would literally yell things at me because I was always like, he's doing that, she's doing this. And it was horrible. Yeah, it took me quite some years to catch on to the fact that it was a toxic culture, that, you let kind of people do their own thing and you mind your own business. So that was quite an adaptation for me. And in kindergarten is when I had a lot to contend with. My parents left on vacation for about a week with my dad's boss, which I didn't understand because he was a non-Jehovah Witness person. And my parents had my siblings and me. I have an older brother and an older sister. I'm the baby of the family, the black sheep. So my parents had a married couple from our congregation, a brother and a sister, is what we referred to them as, come and babysit us for that week. And during that week, the brother molested me. And sorry, it was very confusing, and I felt a lot of shame and guilt, and I didn't understand what it all was about. Yeah, it was a pretty messed up week. Though I did end up mustering up the courage to tell my mom when they came back from their vacation, only to be told that he was an upstanding member of our congregation and that he would never do anything like that to me, and that I needed to continue being nice to him when I saw him at events or meetings, church events or church meetings, basically. So that was a really warped time for me. I was even more awkward at school. I was very withdrawn and distracted. I remember, I'm going full on here. I remember urinating on myself during class for about 2 years and being sent to the office and being told to choose some pants out of the lost and found and get changed and just go back to class. I didn't understand what was happening to me. It's as though my head was underwater constantly. I couldn't hear things properly. I couldn't process anything. I was very detached and disassociated from a lot of the world around me. And I didn't understand that those were all, I guess, symptoms of abuse. And I had to but I had to contend with it on my own and deal with all of that stuff on my own. So I guess that was the beginning of my spiraling, in a sense.
And did your school, did the teachers, the staff, did they notice anything? And if they did they ever notify your parents?
Being a Jehovah Witness already puts you in that weirdo category. And I was already a pretty awkward kid. So no, definitely not. And as a Jehovah Witness, you're not encouraged to go and speak or seek help outside of that Jehovah Witness bubble. People from the world are really seen as no good. They're often referred to as sheep's and wolf's clothing, that they're the ones that are going to abuse you and are going to be violent. So you don't talk to them. Even the police is not an entity that's respected within the Jehovah Witness organization. So I thought that by telling my mom it was the right thing to do, but instead of getting protected, I basically got muted. So no, I kind of kept going. I'm in the 80s, I don't think that a kid having a few accidents at school alarmed them enough to do anything. I don't think they understood they understood the concept back then at that time. But it was a really messed up and confusing time for me.
How were things when you got into high school?
Jeez. That was like a whole that was a whole other realm to me. I went through a couple of years where I was obviously struggling with self-acceptance, self-esteem. I got really, really depressed. To be honest, there was a few suicide attempts in my teenage years. I was really confused with the fact that my parents were all in for blood transfusions. Basically, the Jehovah Witnesses aren't allowed to accept blood transfusions, and they would train me to fight for my right to die rather than for my right to live. And I think that with all the issues that I was already juggling, contemplating suicide kind of felt like a comforting thing where I just wouldn't feel that pain and I wouldn't have to contend with struggling on a daily basis. So my teenage years were, I guess, messed up, very confusing. You add on to that you're going through puberty, you don't understand already what's going on with yourself. My mom wasn't one to sit down with me and have conversations about this is what's going to happen. And it was very cut and dry. By the time I was about 14, the physical abuse started subsiding a little bit and the verbal abuse ramped up to a whole different level. So it was my mother going in with, you're fat, you're ugly, you're stupid, you're never going to be able to accomplish anything good. You need to draw close to Jehovah. He's the only thing in this world that can save you. That to me was just not sufficient. I already didn't understand what all the books were talking about. It kind of went over my head. Reading the Bible, I found was extremely boring. I have a book of Revelations, which is dedicated to talking about the end of times, what's going to happen at the end of times. And, if you're a faithful servant of Jehovah, then, you get to get resurrected after Armageddon and live on a paradise on earth forever. And that's kind of like the golden trophy, it's what everybody wants. So if you're a good Jehovah Witness, that's your prize. And I just never found it believable. And trying to voice my opinions on that was very difficult because I would immediately get shut down. You can't contradict what they say. They always say, oh, we encourage you to do research. But the second you start questioning anything, you automatically get branded. And that's kind of a tough world to maneuver as you know, when you start asking questions, all of a sudden it's like, you're the bad apple. It was confusing to me because it was like, ask us for explanations, but when you do, then, it's like getting a punch in the face. It's like, no, you can't. You don't question us. We know what we're talking about. It's the truth. It's the only religion on earth that is the right one. And I always kept thinking, only one? Like, really? There's too many points that didn't add up, that didn't make sense to me. But having my entire family in the cult, having grown up, everybody I knew was in that cult. So leaving was extremely scary and destabilizing for me because if I were to leave, it was like starting from scratch. And I was still young and trying to find myself and figure out who the heck I was and what I wanted in life. And I met this other girl who was kind of in the same frame of mind as I was. She was a Jehovah Witness, but she hated it. And we started rebelling together. So, at 15, I was smoking and drinking was my escape because it numbed me. And I was able to not think about anything or deal with the intensity of my feelings at that point. And we would go to concerts and wait around and hang out in the tour bus with the band and then drink into oblivion until we'd pass out. And we did that for quite some time because it was our escape. And we didn't tell anybody. It was kind of our own little secret. And, the whole I'm sleeping at her house, she's sleeping at my house kind of situation. And that was a lot of my teenage years, being, I guess, rebellious because I didn't understand how tormented I was, and I didn't know how else to handle all the shit I was dealing with. So,
Was this your first time ever being rebellious?
Yeah.
And how did that make you feel? Because I know, like, growing up in a cult or being in a cult, there is a lot of focus on guilt and shame. So as you're getting into this new world of rebellion, did you ever feel sick to your stomach? Like, oh my God, what am I doing? And how'd you manage?
I would get scared of getting caught constantly, always looking over my
Mm.
shoulder. I was scared of what would happen to me if my parents found out and what would happen to me at home. Was I going to get an even bigger beating? It's weird because as a Jehovah Witness, you're told to fear God and you're told to be submissive to God. For me, it was fearing my mother and being submissive to my mother. I mean, she ruled our household with an iron fist, and you did not say no to her. If you said no, you ate it. So I would always see all these people kind of drinking the Kool-Aid going, oh no, you can't sin because it hurts God and you don't want to disappoint him and you do want to go to paradise on earth. I didn't have that train of thought ever. It was always, oh my gosh, what if my mom finds out like I'm so dead? The beginning was difficult because you feel like you're on a wound up elastic where you want your freedom so badly and you want to do what you want to do and you want to rebel and not have a care in the world. But at the same time, you have like this fear, this force that just pulls you back in, and you're constantly divided between two trains of thoughts and two wants and two worlds. And it's what made me spiral out of control. And I got even more rebellious, which was bad. There was someone else that we met in my congregation. He was into goth clubs, and as a Jehovah Witness, that's like a big no. And he took us out, my friend and I, and he's like, "I'll take you guys clubbing." We were like, "What's clubbing?" So then that became a new addiction of drinking and clubbing, going to concerts, and obviously my parents started noticing that something was wrong with me. So the verbal abuse started ramping up more. I ended up getting a job because I wanted to go out, make my own money. And it was this shitty telemarketing job that I hated so much. I was about 16 at the time, and my boss was 26, and he was this louder than life kind of guy. He walks in a room and he owns it and he talks loud and, he attracts a lot of attention. And I didn't realize at the time that him taking me out for dinner in really fancy restaurants was grooming. And so a few months into that, I got groomed to the point that he pressured me into sleeping with him, which I did. And I didn't understand, as you know, you're not explained what red flags are when you're in a cult. You're not explained that you should question things, to listen to your gut feelings. You're programmed to think a certain way and not to go beyond and past that train of thought. So I had no idea what grooming was. I had no idea that it was insanely inappropriate for a 16-year-old and a 26-year-old to hang out together. So when my parents found out, because obviously I didn't show up, I didn't come home to sleep. My father started pressuring me. There was a lot of verbal abuse, a lot of yelling, and I came out with it. And instead of having that reaction of, you know what, I'm going to kill that guy, it was, but you sinned against God, and now you need to be punished. So he went to the elders of the congregation, who are like priests, and he tattletaled on me, which brought on a committee, is what they call it. So it's the elders of the congregation sit down to have a discussion with you on what you did and what the repercussions are going to be. And I remember being very, very cold with the elders, and they said, well, if you're not going to be repentant, you're gone, you're out. You've done all these things and you're against God, so you're disfellowshipped. And that means that you are shunned, ostracized, cut off from everyone you've ever known, and you're not allowed to speak to them anymore because you're
just like that.
Just like that. You're alive, yet you're dead to everyone. It's the weirdest, most disgusting feeling ever to be. It's like being put in a cage. You can't have a normal life being outside that cult if you choose to be outside. And you can't have a normal life if you choose to be inside and question. You're kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't. I guess to better understand, I got baptized when I was about 11, which I should have mentioned earlier. When you're baptized, it's kind of like signing your death sentence. So if you're not baptized in the Jehovah Witnesses, you cannot get disfellowshipped. You can kind of do what you want, but they will reprove you and say, oh, you're a bad influence if you do this or that, but people will still talk to you. People will still be engaging with you. The second you get baptized, if you go against any Jehovah Witness rule and they deem you to be non-repentant, you're out. There's no 3 strikes. It's like strike 1, you're gone, you're disfellowshipped, and that's it. So for a teenager to be disfellowshipped, all of a sudden my parents are barely talking to me. My brother and sister, that was done a while before I was disfellowshipped, that they wanted nothing to do with me. And now everybody I grew up around, everybody I ever knew, I could no longer hang out with, talk to. I literally had to turn around, do a 180 and start a new life for myself. And I moved out of my parents, and a couple of months later, I landed in the hospital again for another suicide attempt. I was so miserable and so alone, and I didn't know how to cope with being on my own, and it was just too much. And that was a really tough one. I remember them calling my parents because I was underage. The initial reaction, if it were my kid, would be a hug and let's get you some help. And instead, my mom showed up at the hospital shaking her head in complete disapproval, looking at me like I was pathetic and just a piece of crap laying there. And she went like, if you would have put God first, you wouldn't be laying in this bed right now. That was the first words she told me. And I had to go back and live with my parents. It was either that or they were going to have to put me in a psychiatric ward, which my mom made it sound like it was the scariest thing on earth. Now, thinking about it, probably would have been a good place for me to go, to get some help and therapy and process what was happening to me. But yeah, so I went back with my parents for a little bit, and the drinking started again, and I was unraveling all over again. And not being able to talk to anybody.
Did you ever feel like you wanted to get back into the Jehovah Witnesses?
I didn't at that time. It's kind of a weird thing to say, but growing up in that, I always felt like a fish out of water. I didn't understand their teachings. I didn't care for their teachings. I was more fascinated with things I wasn't supposed to do rather than, what was expected of me. So when I got out, I did end up meeting some people, which was great and confusing at the same time, because then you're kind of running around like a headless chicken. You're like celebrating everything. You're finding reasons to celebrate something. You're kind of lost, and at the same time trying to find your way, and everything is new and exciting. And the Jehovah Witness teachings, I wanted nothing to do with that. I knew, and it wasn't worth going back and having to live a double life for me. I wasn't close to my siblings from a very young age. My mom would always pit us against one another, so there wasn't that sense of family. It was more the friends and the people that I had known that I missed having around. I missed talking to, I missed partying with, I missed being bad with, so to speak. And it always confused me, because all those people stayed in, but they were all, having parties, getting drunk, or smoking pot. You're not supposed to. And I would always wonder, like, why can't you just make a decision and get out and leave? That was more my train of thought. The last thing I wanted at that point was to go back. So I basically dated all the wrong guys. I went for narcissists that were abusive, because it's all I knew. I thought that abuse was love. Growing up in the Jehovah Witnesses, that's how they present it. They always say God is love, and God is expecting your parents to discipline you because discipline is love. So it kind of warps your train of thought as to what is normal in a relationship, what's normal in friendships, what's acceptable. You don't have boundaries. You don't understand what boundaries are. So, I went down a really messed up path of horrible guys that I dated. I came to date someone when I was about 25 who I thought was, all that in a bag of chips, and truly wasn't. He ended up getting deep into drugs, and he was really high one night and got aggressive, and he ended up raping me. And I remember kind of having this out of body experience of, what's happening, but you're just watching it from a different perspective. I don't know how to explain it. And I said nothing. I did nothing. I didn't report him. I didn't fight for myself, because I was never shown to do that. I was shown to shut up and turn the other cheek and try to help him. So I tried helping him. He went into rehab, and not long after, I got pregnant. And that was my wake-up call. When I got pregnant, I know for different people, they wake up with different moments, different aha moments through their life. And for me, it was my daughter. I stopped smoking, drinking. I quit my DJ gig. I was like, I'm done. I'm going to get a serious job. I'm going to be a mom, and a good one, better than the one I had. And that's when I got sucked back into the Jehovah Witnesses. I remember calling my mom, telling her, I'm pregnant. And of course, oh my gosh, what'd you do? This is horrible. You're not married. You're a fornicator, all this stuff. And you absolutely need to come back to God, because this is just, you're living your life going against all these rules and these conditions. And at first I was like, whatever. But then the phone calls increased, and she started using certain Bible verses that said that God would punish the child of a sinner. And she started telling me that if I didn't come back to Jehovah, that at the end of times, Armageddon, which was coming really quickly because the end of time was knocking on my door, that he would kill my child because I was not a Jehovah Witness anymore. And I was a sinner. And that stuck with me. That scared me. And I went back. I moved back in with my parents. I left my abusive ex-boyfriend. And then I went down the Jehovah Witness rabbit hole for the second time. They brought me back in really quickly. It only took a couple of months, and they were like, you're reinstated. You're no longer disfellowshipped. You're back into the fold. You know, we need to teach your daughter. She's at a young age, you know, she's ripe. Which sounds so messed up when I think about it. But I went back and I figured I have all these questions, all these theories that you guys are telling me that I find don't make sense. Now I want you to answer all my questions if I'm going to be back. You know, the Bible was written by men that were inspired by God never made sense to me. I asked them to fully explain to me why God, who is loving or portrayed as loving, and the Bible says so many times that God is unconditional love, then why would he kill my daughter for my mistakes? Because she's an innocent child. And I honestly was incredibly unsatisfied with their answers.
What were their answers?
I remember the sister is what we call them in the congregation. I don't know if that's how you called them when you were in. But the sister was sitting with me, and she read me these 3 Bible verses, which to this day, don't ask me what they were because it kind of went over my head. And she goes, it says it in the Bible, like right here. And I was like, but you're not explaining to me why God would kill a child for my sins. Well, it's because it says it in the Bible. And that was her main argument, which to me felt very empty. You know, if you're going to make such a threat, you know, especially to a new mom, you got to back that up with like, bring me an encyclopedia that has like a chapter dedicated to it, or, you know, bring me some foundations so I can build a train of thought on it and it actually makes sense. And it's like a puzzle where the pieces come together. But the more they were explaining things to me, the more it felt like that puzzle didn't even make sense in the first place. You know, no, there was not one piece that was connecting with another in my mind. And that's when I started going, this is not for me at all.
And as I'm hearing the answers by that sister, as well as all the Bible verses that your mom would be throwing, all these answers sound just so programmed, just memorized, and there's no internal thought, you know, reasoning, why or how or where did this originate from, and you know, just
Exactly.
just logic, basic logic. Um, there is a Bible verse. I'm not memorizing all these Bible verses, but there is one Bible verse. I think it's the Bible, but it says something like, if you say you love God, but you hate your neighbor, you're a liar. Did that ever come across at any time, that verse?
Never, never. That's a good one, which I did not think of at that time. No, I kind of get really triggered when I go into that world, and a part of me sitting down with that sister would kind of go numb, if I can be that blunt.
Mhm.
I don't even remember which scriptures she showed me. I remember she would basically juggle between 3, and it was just rereading them. It's kind of like when you're trying, when you go to a debate, you know, and they're asking you, all right, you know, what are you going to be doing for this community? And you're like, I'm going to do good, Bob. It's like, okay, but like, what are you going to do? I'm going to do some good shit. Promise. Okay. Do you have a plan? Could you elaborate? That's how I felt my entire life with the Jehovah Witnesses was, here's your book. You read it. You underline it. You make your comments at the meetings. You go door to door and you're golden.
Well,
Yeah.
you're not expected to ask questions.
No.
You're not supposed to. I mean, I feel
It's
like
conditioning.
you stick to the script.
Yeah.
But what led you to say, okay, I don't want to stick to the script. I want to explore more. What opened that door for you?
Well, obviously, when I was a teenager, I was going through a lot, and deep down, I just never felt a connection to what they were saying. It never added up. It never made sense to me. It kind of felt like it was a lot of fantasy that they were trying to normalize. Even just looking back at some of the stories growing up, we didn't have any children's books. We only had what they called the Jehovah's Witness, My Book of Bible Stories. And most of them are like violent, it's like Cain and Abel killing each other, and then you see like Abel laying down with like blood and a stake in him. And like, it always felt like all these stories that I never really believed in were incredibly violent. There was never any love that was shown in what I was learning. It was always about, you do what we say, or there's a consequence. Oh, excuse me. You do what God says, and then there's a consequence. I kept thinking, but where's this unconditional love that everybody keeps reading out of the Bible and out of all the Jehovah Witness publications? There was too many points that were brought up that were just so broken. I didn't have the eagerness or the curiosity in me to try and fix those pieces. I just wanted nothing to do with it. When I went back, I thought that maybe something was wrong with me. So I needed to figure out if it was me or if it was them for the sake of my daughter. And after probably 6 months of studying, I kind of went back down, and something broke in me where I knew that this was not, it was impossible that it was the only true religion if I wasn't able to get a more concise answer to all the questions that I had. When I really, really woke up 3 years ago, I really started to see the broken pieces for what they truly were. Obviously, beyond my abuse as a kid, which was not acceptable in any shape or form, it should have been handled in such a different way. If you claim to hate pedophiles, if you claim that God is unconditional, where was the justice? Where was the taking care of your flock and making sure that everyone is pure and righteous, which is something that they constantly tell us? If you are protecting someone who is hurting children of all things, that to me was a big piece. It was one of the big parts that made me wake up even more to the fact that they would teach us, oh, look at the Catholic priest, they've abused another child. That is horrible. Look, they are part of Satan's world and they are unworthy of God. But look at them. They claim that they're so self-righteous. But then you take a look at them and you're like, but it's the same thing. So why are you telling me that you're the only true religion when you're doing the exact same thing as these guys? There were too many holes and too many things. And I mean, I could keep you here for 3 days talking about it.
So,
Yeah.
while they use the name of God for everything. God's
Yeah.
love, God this. Oh, you hurt God. Did you feel that they were just using it as a cover so that they can puff themselves up and
Later in
feel?
life, I did. Yeah. Yeah. When I was younger, I didn't because I didn't comprehend it to that point. But as I got older, um, definitely, because you just, I'll give you an example. They build what they call kingdom halls, is the same thing as a church, just a different term. And they will have all their members come in to help build that building. Nobody gets paid. It's all volunteer work. Then they expect other members from that congregation to bring in food and to provide for everybody else because it's volunteer work and it's beautiful. And if you take a look recently, they've been selling so many of those kingdom halls throughout the world, making bank. All right. I won't get into numbers right now, but you would think that if they were the only true religion and if they really did represent God, that some of that money would go back into some of those congregations, say to support families that are struggling financially, or simply to be grateful to have had all that free help from everybody who sacrificed a lot to be part of that construction. Nothing. It goes in their pockets, most likely. Obviously, I don't want to say something that's not true, but I have not heard of one person telling me, yes, they've been selling all these kingdom halls, but they're re-injecting them in the congregations, helping families, helping the community even, which if you read the Bible, Jesus was helping people. He helped all kinds of people, with shady jobs or
Yeah,
I don't want to say it on your show, but I mean, he helped a prostitute, like
yeah. He ate with them. He hung out.
exactly. And you're
He,
telling me that this cult, this religion, whatever they want to call themselves, that represent themselves as being the only true religion on this planet is just pocketing money and they're not following Jesus's steps the way they claim they do. Huge red flag to me right there. That's makes no fucking sense, I mean, that's just one of so many,
oh
one of
yeah.
so many examples.
Well, there are so many pieces that, when you're in the cult, it's just all over the place. But you mentioned that 3 years ago you started opening your eyes or waking up. I'm not sure how you worded it. But do you feel like the pieces in your life are coming together now, or are they still in the process?
A bit of both. I've obviously come a long way. My kids have helped me so much in healing. It's really obviously not everybody's going to agree with my statement, but for me, it was when I had kids that I really understood what unconditional love truly was. With not wanting to recreate the same horrible atrocities that my mom did against me, I sought therapy after my daughter was born, and have been working in therapy ever since. I worked really hard on having a close relationship with my kids, one where they could literally sit down with me and tell me anything. We're calm, we discuss things, we express how we feel. If we need to take a minute, we go take a minute, we come back. There's no verbal or physical abuse to me. It's disgusting. And that, to be honest, has been my glue to being able to heal, though there's days that are completely shitty and I don't feel like getting out of bed, but I still have to. Other days are better and I can cope with things in a different light and in a better light. And I think that had it not been for my kids, even though they came from horrible relationships, they are love. And that to me has been a huge part of my healing process and being able to move forward.
Now I wanted to ask you, for you, what is a truth that heals, a truth that you think can resonate with someone, even just one person in the audience?
Something that held me back was not trusting my gut enough. If you have that doubt, if you have that question, if you have something that doesn't feel right, go with it, explore it, ask questions, research. Don't let anyone mute you. No one else will advocate for you but yourself. If you can't stand up for yourself, you are going to stay in that cycle. So that's one thing that I truly believe in. If doesn't matter if people say the gut feelings are wrong and you can't question, be rebellious, investigate, do what you need to do in order to find the truth, to find your own truth, answer your questions. And I think if people push those boundaries more, a lot of people would wake up and be able to get out sooner.
Thank you very much, Karinne. And as we start wrapping this up, can you tell the audience a bit about your memoir? How is that going for you?
It's a labor of love. I've been working on it for about 2.5 years, and I'm hoping to be able to publish it by the end of this year. There's so much to say and so many pages, which is my struggle. But yeah, it's definitely, it's been hard to write, but it's been healing at the same time. It's helped me to come to terms with a lot of things in my life. It's helped me realize and take consciousness of a lot of things as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it being out. It's called Girl in Shambles, which explains my Insta handle. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. My daughter's actually designing my book cover, which is kind of cool. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing your story, also sharing your truth. And I am looking forward to having my own copy of Girl in Shambles.
For
So
sure. Thank you so much for having me.
thank you.